Hello and welcome to Deep Blue Sea, the podcast. I am your host, Jay Cluett, once again hosting solo without my regular co-host Mark Hoffmeyer, who is on paternity leave. We are covering Deep Blue Sea adjacent films that I am unfamiliar with, and this week we are continuing our quest through the Jaws franchise, the Jaws sequels, as it were, with Jaws 3, or Jaws III, or Jaws 3D, depending on which version we watch. What is Jaws 3D? Well, it's the Jaws film. It's kind of in the name. And this one believes it abandons Amity Island and heads to SeaWorld, to actual literal SeaWorld, in Orlando, Florida, where Mike Brody, now played by Dennis Quaid, is working as some kind of technician guy, and wouldn't you know it, there's a shark. Things go awry. Hilarity ensues. So I need somebody, this is my first time watching Jaws 3, I need somebody who is more familiar with the film to help guide me through it. So joining us, returning from, a return guest back from like episode 4, I think, of Deep Blue Sea, a long time ago, from the Jam Report, is Doug Jamison. Doug, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. Good to be back.
I think the last time we spoke to you, we just arrived at Aquatica, and Janice was giving the exposition of like giving Russell Franklin the tour of the set.
So that amazing scene.
Yes, it's an all-timer, I think. I mean, Deep Blue Sea is 33 all-timer scenes as far as I'm concerned. So, but Jaws 3. So before we get into Jaws 3, what's your kind of background with the Jaws franchise? Any thoughts on Jaws 1 and 2 that make you a fan of these?
I think, like a lot of people, Jaws is certainly one of my favorite films of all time, and it's probably one I watched when I was far too young. I shouldn't have watched it, and it, terrified me completely. I wouldn't go to the beach. I wouldn't get in a boat. It completely, I would say it's one of those films that sort of changed my life. Is it the first film that really made me realize that cinema could have that impact on you, that could actually change the way you do something in your life. And then sort of discovering the other films, they're obviously not anywhere near as great as the greatness of the first film, but I've always had a kind of soft spot in my heart for number 3, even as terrible as it is. It's a lot of fun, and it's that one, like, classic sort of so bad it's good. And I actually find myself watching 3 probably more than 2, because I think 2, the problem with 2 is it basically tries to replicate the first film, whereas at least 3, they certainly tried to do something very different. It didn't work, but you got to give them credit for trying something different.
Well, that's it. Jaws 2 is, we talked about it last week, it's a legitimately good film. It's got a decent plot, there's some good kills in it, it's solid, but Jaws 1 is better in every conceivable way.
Yes.
So if you're like thinking, I'm going to chuck on a shark film, you're going to put on Jaws. But you're going to think, I'm going to put on a terrible shark film. Then you might reach for Jaws 3. Jaws 2 is the kind of mediocre middle ground.
Yeah. And it follows a lot of the same beats as the first film. That's the problem. Is it sort of doesn't differentiate itself. Okay, it's more focused on younger people this time. That's its main point of difference. But we're still on Amity Island. We're still out to sea. We're still sort of retreading a lot of the same ground. Whereas 3 completely changes location. It's a completely different concept, and as it really goes for that more camp factor, and obviously has the added element of 3D on top of it as well. Yes.
Did you watch this in 3D, or have you seen it in 3D?
I have seen an attempted version with the sort of red and green glasses. And,
attempted version.
That's a real treat. I mean, the problem is obviously we've been spoiled now of in the sort of recent reincarnation of 3D with the sort of Avatar craze of what 3D really should look like, and what it looked like back in the day are obviously not really comparable.
Yeah, so I've only got a 2D copy, so I've just watched this in basic 2D. I can't say I'm going to make any great inroads to seek out a 3D version, but it's pretty obvious where all the 3D stuff is happening. When there's a tentacle coming at the screen. Okay, there's an eel. But it's all, I can't imagine it. Well, I'm going to try and get this out of the way at the start. The effects in Jaws 3D are abysmal. They are not good. I don't want us to harp on that for the next hour. I just want to get it out of the way up front. Every time any kind of special effect occurred, I was dying laughing. This came out in 1983, the same year as Return of the Jedi, so like 6 years after Star Wars.
Yeah.
8 years after Jaws, and everything in this is not good. Like the opening kill is a fish. There's just a bunch of underwater shots, and then there's a big fish. I think it's honestly like a grouper, but I really don't know. And then there's a cloud of red, so the fish gets killed. But its head is like its mouth is still kind of bobbing open, close as the fish head circles around. There's a thick black outline around it, as is the case with any kind of disembodied limb or arm or goggles or anything like the film. There's just this thick black cartoon outline, like they've done it in Photoshop, and they've clicked the little magic wand button and hit delete, but they've not refined the tolerance enough to get all of that. So I just have to get that out of the way, effects wise.
And yet it still cost $18 million, which,
yes.
you know, like where that money went is very hard to say.
Well, I mean, from what I've heard, this film didn't so much have a craft services as it had a cocaine table. Because in interviews that Dennis Quaid has done, he is apparently high in every second of he's on the screen of this film. Which, to be fair, it doesn't show. There's a scene where he's running through the park, which, yes, it shows there, but for the rest of it, it's kind of a fairly competent performance. So,
and that, I mean, it is the 80s, so like what I'm sure most movies were quite similar back then.
I mean, we've already mentioned Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
And also to get out of the way, people who've listened to me on other podcasts in the past might know that Dennis Quaid is not my favourite person in the world. I find him to be the worst thing about bad films for the second half of his career, at least. It's a hurdle I've tried to overcome to discuss this film today. I would say, as I said, competent performance. He's fine in this. I don't know. He's never done anything to me personally. I have never met the guy. I just don't know what it is. But whenever I see him in a film, I'm just like, I just don't get on with him. I feel like he has an evil face, I want to say. He just has like, I feel like he should have played the Joker at some point. He just has that right kind of, the angles and the mouth, everything just kind of looks kind of evil, but he always plays the hero, and it just doesn't, well, not always, he regularly plays the hero, and I feel like this is a guy, he should be amongst the Alan Rickmans of the world. Alan Rickman's never been a hero, so he knows his place. Dennis Quaid should be there as well. So I just had to get those two things out of the way before we dig into Jaws 3. So when I sent out a list of potential Deep Blue Sea adjacent films to yourself and other guests, Jaws 3 was the most picked film, I think.
Yeah.
Certainly amongst the Jaws sequels. I had 3 or 4 people all vying for this film, and I was surprised at that, because I'd heard 2 is great, 3, 4, less great. So is it just kind of the campy fun side of it, do you think?
I think so, and I think that it's because of that it's far more rewatchable than 2. One is that, you know, iconic, that it's sort of timeless, it never gets old. 2 is, as you said, it's a solid film, but it's I guess it's slightly forgettable by comparison to 1, whereas 3, as bad as it is incredibly memorable for those reasons. You know, that it has that camp factor where those movies are far more enjoyable to watch, I think, because you get something out of it that 2 doesn't give you, in a way. And whether that was all intentional or not, which I'm sure it wasn't. Obviously, they weren't setting out to make a bad film, unless they were. But that's what keeps you coming back to it. I think it's more fun to watch knowing how bad it actually is.
Fair enough. Yes. It's almost frustrating at times. I feel like there is a great film in here, because the premise of there's a shark at SeaWorld and it's not supposed to be there. That's you could make and I just feel like if they kind of tightened up the script a little bit, pay off a few things that they set up early on, and just never go back to. You like these characters? That's a shame. They're not going to die, they're just going to disappear.
Well, it kind of plays on fears, but because we've all been to a sea park of some sort, whether it's a SeaWorld or whether it's a local version, or we've all been somewhere like this, or we've been to an aquarium with those sort of underwater tubes with often with sharks in those sort of tanks. So it actually could play on very real fears. Like I remember after seeing this movie as a kid, we have a SeaWorld here up in a northern state, Queensland. And so when I would go there, I would be thinking of this movie, but not necessarily fearful as I was with the first film of being on a boat. Because it has that campiness, because it's so silly, there's not a lot of realism to it. But if they pulled that back and actually embraced the sort of the fear and the realism of the first film, it could have been something genuinely terrifying and stopped you ever going to a sea park ever again, because this could, if this could actually happen. And our SeaWorld in Australia is on the coastline that connects out to open water. So it could, in essence, it could actually happen there. They rescue animals and bring them in through these channels that directly connect out to the ocean. So in my mind, I'm like, I wonder if a shark could ever swim in there one day and then start attacking, the performers and attack the tank underwater and things. So that's the problem, is that it doesn't embrace the realism enough, and then because it has that added 3D on top of it that takes you out of the potential realism of everything.
Yeah, so maybe it's setting it in an actual SeaWorld, who I'm guessing may have contributed money-wise to this, or they set up some kind of a deal.
Yeah.
But if this had been at a fictional, I also went to Sea Parks from the IT crowd. If they'd set it in just some kind of fictional place, then they could have had a bit more danger, killed off a few more, because there's so few deaths. There's two sequences of big water skiing pyramids and a shark right behind them, swimming through them, knocking them over, everyone falling in the water. No one dies in either of those scenes.
Yeah.
It's like there's so many people, you could take out half of them. None of them have names, they're all just background characters. You've got Leah Thompson and then other people. So they'll just get out.
Those are the kind of the best sort of horror or thriller movies, is when it's sort of indiscriminate killings, when it's not, characters you actually know, when it's a whole bunch of people who, are almost innocent in a way, or you could have had that with people who attended the park who somehow got caught up in it. There's none of that where, it's an imminent threat to a large amount of people. It's still very targeted in that it's only one death at a time.
Yeah.
And I mean, it kind of reminded me that was my disappointment with the Meg a couple of years ago, is that there was so many sequences with this giant shark with it was approaching that beach with literally hundreds of people.
Yep.
And it could have been this massive feeding frenzy, and it doesn't happen.
It could have been cleaning leaves out of a swimming pool.
Literally, yeah. So that's the thing here. There are so many opportunities for, and that would kind of ramp it up. If that's what you're going to do with sequels, you've got to increase these sorts of things to outdo what's happened before. So when you set something in a park where there's not only a whole lot of people attending, but a whole lot of people working there, and they basically all survive by the end of this, it's like you kind of pulled back when you really could have gone for it.
Yeah, because as you say, no tourists die in this film. You get a bunch. I think some get injured during the bumper boats attack.
Yes.
Leah Thompson gets injured, but presumably survives. I don't know. We don't see her or Sean ever again. They're never even mentioned after that point. And there's the guy who's closing the gate. He dies first. There's the two thieves who we'll get to very shortly, because I want to talk about them. They don't make it. And then there's the Australian guy, the cameraman, the photographer, the wildlife guy.
Yeah.
He doesn't make it. And that's about it, I think.
That's about it.
A bunch of tourists get stuck in one of the tunnels, but they all get out fine. There's the Australian guy's got a British cameraman who I don't know how he survived. I don't. He's like, as soon as he appears, okay, this guy is gonna die. There's a scene when they're out on some kind of mission.